Let's move ahead. So everybody charged is a Russian so far. No votes were changed, although some were perpetrated. So where is the supposed Russian collusion as of yet? Dan Bongino is all over this. His investigative skills are without peer. He's a former Secret Service agent himself, NRA TV contributor, and of course we love having him on. Dan, what did you learn from today?
Well, I read through the indictment, Brian. There are a couple of key takeaways. Number one, as Charlie said, and he's absolutely correct, it's clear as day now there are two parallel tracks. And the sad part is these tracks are starting, there's some cross-contamination going on here. Here's track number one that has bipartisan agreement. We all agree. The Russians are not our friends. They tried to tamper with the election. The indictment is very detailed, and it's very substantive. It details a spear phishing operation by Russian GRU members to try to steal data from some Democrats and infiltrate some potential Republicans and the lobbyists and members of the press. That's fine. We're all in agreement. The Russians are not our friends. The problem is there's no collusion, Brian. We've been told for, what, almost 2 years now? That somehow Trump colluded with the Russians or his team members to alter the results of the election, and there is still absolutely zero evidence of that whatsoever, and it is bogging down our political process.
So there's a big call among some of the leadership on the Democratic side for the president, in light of this information, to not meet with Vladimir Putin. Would that be a good move, Dan?
No, why should he not meet with him? You know, I don't understand. I never get... I can't figure out Democrats for the life of me. You know, they debate themselves all the time on issues. They had absolutely no problem. This is not whataboutism. It's about principles, right? When Barack Obama met with Cuban representatives down in Cuba, they had no issue with that. But now we know Donald Trump has information he can confront Putin with about documented Russian military members, we're talking about a Freudian slip, right? Trying to infiltrate our election process, and they want him to call off the meeting? That's absurd. That's ridiculous. This is actually the perfect opportunity to hit Putin on it.
Do you believe, Dan Bongino, that they're going to try it again this midterm?
Of course. I mean, this is our main geopolitical foe. I mean, this is a nuclear-powered nation that's figured out a time ago that if they can sow domestic chaos, they can rip the United States apart from within. And that's the problem, Brian, I have with these parallel tracks. There's one credible investigation, and this garbage Trump-Russian collusion investigation, which it's a house of sand. There's nothing there. The Democrats need to just let this thing go and focus on the real enemy, which is the Russian part of the infiltration.
Dan, you're not the real enemy. You're a real friend of the show and the network. Thanks so much.
Thanks, pal.
All right, let's move ahead. Chris Hahn is a radio host and former aide to Senator Schumer, and also a really good guy. First off, Chris, did you learn anything new about today?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's very serious stuff that was announced today in these indictments. I think it's something that the president, if he's going to go forward with his meeting with Vladimir Putin, better, as John McCain suggested today, bring this up and walk out of the room if he doesn't get real answers on it. In fact, I don't think the president should be alone with Vladimir Putin at this point. The president is probably not prepared to have this conversation. He should bring a senior diplomat with him, and he should have a real note-taker there so we can understand what was said and what was done. I think that these are serious things. It's serious business. There were some serious attempts to infiltrate our election system, not just the DNC and Democratic operatives, but it appears from this indictment that it's very clear that the Russians got into some voting systems around this country. They didn't get and change any votes, but they did get into the access files of Board of Elections around this country, and that's something we should be taking very serious here.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Chris, I think part of the problem is, and this is how I equate it to you, tell me if you buy this analogy. If after 9/11, people, instead of focusing on bin Laden, they focused on Bush saying he knew about the attack ahead of time, you wouldn't blame President Bush for getting a little defensive and saying, really, 3,000 people died and I wanted that to happen? And with Donald Trump, the way he profiles, if you're going to take away the credibility of his victory and then say the Russians helped him and he worked with the Russians, that's going to strike at his core. The minute this Mueller probe can be complete, and if it is clinical and can be detailed, and can remove the personalities and the parties out of it, I think we're going to see some real progress. We got to get this probe done and get past the finger pointing. Don't you agree with that?
Well, look, I want to get this probe done, but I want to get done right. This probe, as compared to other probes of presidencies in the past, is in its infancy. I mean, the Clinton-Whitewater probe lasted 7 years. This probe's been going on just over a year now, and it's produced dozens of indictments at this point. So I think it's moving along rather swiftly.
Right.
Look, I don't think anybody in this country wants to think that the president of the United States was engaged in a conspiracy with the Russians. That's way down the rabbit hole, and it leads to too many questions and too many problems, which are really damaging to this republic. We want to know what's going on here. Do I think that there may have been Americans working with the Russians on this? Probably. I don't know how they could have targeted the way they did and sent out these emails without real knowledge of this system. That doesn't mean that the president himself did it, but it is somewhat of a coincidence that on the day the president asked the Russians to find those emails, that was the day they attacked Hillary Clinton's email. So look. I hope to God the president had nothing to do with it, but I think this investigation needs to be given the latitude and the time and the patience to get it done right.
But, Chris, that just breaks to the president's credibility, because nobody who was conspiring would ever go public in a press conference and say, hey, WikiLeaks, give me more things, if they actually thought they were in control of it. The other thing is, we know after Trump won, they also were fomenting the anti-Trump riots that Michael Moore even went to. They were actually run by Russian bots. I also lost 5,000 followers yesterday on Twitter, and I don't think 5,000 people broke up with me. They were fake, as the Barack Obama lost 1 million, and so did Trump. Chris, it's going to be very interesting moving forward. Hopefully we can get past this, and Democrats and Republicans can stop hating each other full time and start working together at some point.
I don't hate anybody, and I don't think anybody should hate anybody because they disagree with them. That's why I come on this network, to have a real debate about real issues. But I want to know the truth about what happened in this election, and we should all want to know the truth about that.
He is Chris Hahn. Thanks so much, Chris. All right.
Thank you.
I got to tell you, this wasn't the